So let me just share with you that a few years ago, I was flying from Arizona to Chicago where I live, and I was sitting next to a man who had 6 Purple Hearts. So I wondered what some of you are wondering, how do you earn a Purple Heart? He was about 90 years old, a World War II veteran, and he earned each of those Purple Hearts by demonstrating a certain amount of bravery in battle. So in other words, for 3.5 hours, I'm on a flight, sitting next to the bravest human being I ever met in my life. He said, "Mark, what do you do?" I said, "I'm a social worker. I talk to social workers and counselors and case managers and drug abuse therapists." And he told me to tell you, thank you for your service. I read a book called Good to Great, and the author says you can tell what's most important to a society by its tallest buildings. Think about it. 100 years ago, the tallest buildings were churches. Today, the tallest buildings are Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. But the author said that no society is great just because you have tall buildings and Fortune 500 companies and Fortune 100 companies. You're great when you have great drug abuse counselors and social workers and case managers and psychologists, people who help others for a living. So if you're sitting in a room where there's a mirror nearby, I want to invite you to look at yourself in the mirror and then repeat the following to yourself. This is your lucky day. You're staring at greatness. Take a moment and do that if you would. So I've actually been an addictions counselor for 3.5 decades. And people ask me what keeps me going. How have I been able to do this work for so long? And the answer is recovery. So I've done lots of work on Native American reservations, and we often start our work together by sharing stories. So if it's okay, I'd like to share with you 2 stories. The first happened in March of 1986. I was sitting in my office downtown Chicago. The phone rang. A man called me collect. He was in tears. He was crying. He said, "I need to see a counselor today." So I looked in the appointment book and I told him, I said, "I can see you in an hour." He said, "It'll take 8 hours." He lived on 103rd Street South. My office was located downtown Chicago on Jackson and State Street. He walked 103 blocks to meet with me. Was he motivated? He had gotten paid that Friday and spent his whole paycheck on cocaine. So he called me collect at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. He showed up exhausted and in tears. I knew that if I would have talked to him for a whole hour, I might have made him feel better, and he might not have gotten help. So 10 minutes into our assessment, I said, "Are you ready to get up?" "I'm ready." I said, "If you leave my office and go and stand on the corner of Jackson and State Street, a bus will appear. Take the bus to the end of the line. At the end of the line, there's a drug treatment center." He said, "I don't have bus fare." And I was about to reach in my pocket and give him bus fare. And then one of my professor's voices came into my head. "We're not about charity, about helping people help themselves. Give a man a fish each for a day, teach a man a fish each for a lifetime." I went in my pocket and I gave him bus fare. He walked 103 blocks. Then I left my desk to wait for the bus with him. Then I wondered, why was I sitting behind a desk and people are dying outside? To this day, there are too many counselors sitting behind desks while people are dying outside. So I went outside with him. I waited for the bus. And as the bus approached, I said, "At the end of the line, there's a drug treatment center. I paid his bus fare." He came back a year to the day that I gave him that bus fare and gave it back and said that he was grateful for his recovery. What I've learned in my 3.5 decades of doing this work is that once you help someone recover, eventually gratitude sets in. And once they become grateful for their recovery, they start helping people. And then the people they help start helping people. And then those that they help start helping people. In other words, your great work never ends. Native Americans told me to tell you that what you do today to help a person recover will impact their family across 7 generations. The second story happened not too long ago. I was leading a therapy group with these 7 teenage girls. And between these 7 teenage girls, they had 7 days of recovery. In other words, the only recovery these girls had was that day. And I heard in the residential facility where they were receiving services, there was a young adult woman, 19 years old, walking around the same facility with 3 years of recovery. So I selfishly thought what you would have thought. We need her in this group so that her recovery could rub off on them. Did you know that recovery is contagious? That you can be near recovery and catch it? So I called her therapist and I asked, can she be in the group? Her therapist says, no, she's doing fine all by herself. I called the second time, can she be in our group? No, she's doing fine all by herself. I called the third time, and maybe there's something magical about 3. Her therapist says, okay, she can be in the group. Turns out she wasn't doing fine. She came to that group and said, I was going to relapse today. Our timing was impeccable. The second group she attended, she says, Mark, I want to be a social worker. I want to help girls. And I said, you can do it. You can become a social worker. You can help girls. She came back the following week and said, when you said I could be a social worker, I could help girls, I cried all day, all week, and all day, all night, all week. She says, I had 4 therapists before, and you were the only one who said I could be a social worker. And I told her there's only 2 things that qualify a person to do the work that you do. You're either an expert, meaning that you went to school to study it, or you took webinars from Southeast ATTC. You're either an expert or a witness. You've lived it. She was living with her parents, and her father would get drunk and beat her mother. And she and the mother were convinced that one day the father might kill the mother. So in the middle of the night, she and her mother fled and moved to Chicago, feeling safe for a while. She was living with an uncle who would come into her room and assault her and abuse her. She's a witness. She's lived it. When I said you can do it, you can be a social worker to help girls. She was in community college majoring in general studies. She quickly declared that her major was social work. She received an associate's degree in social work. Then she went to university and got a bachelor's degree in social work. In March of 2018, she called me up to the agency and says, Mark, I have a surprise for you. And when I showed up, she was wearing a sweatshirt from one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And she showed me a letter where that university honored her with $50,000 in scholarship money. June 15, 2019, I attended the graduation ceremony where she received a master's degree in social work. And now she works as a social worker. So those of you in this field, you know that relapse can be quite high. So part of my secret is that I really have a long memory on clients who do really, really well. And that can carry you sometimes. One story like that can carry you for years. So our topic today is helping clients maintain recovery during traumatic catastrophes, like earthquakes, hurricanes, and tornadoes, and pandemics, such as COVID-19. Right before we get into the data, the information that I'm about to share with you, let's take a moment to get centered. You know, those of you who've ever worked in a detox center or residential treatment facility, especially those of you who did the work years ago, do you remember every morning that the day with our clients would always begin with a quiet time and a meditation and the thought for the day and the word for the day? You know, you remember those blue books and those black books? But what I realized the brilliance is that what they were doing in treatment centers back then is they were getting clients centered before they faced the day. My friend Benny Lee says you can't build a shield on the battlefield. You have to be ready before the battle. And one way to get ready is to get centered. So let's take a moment to get centered. And by the way, I encourage you to do exercises like this with your clients when you talk to them by phone or Zoom or however you're communicating with them. COVID-19 is really shaking things up. It's good to start your day getting centered. So would you take a moment and get comfortable in your chair? And all that involves is planting your feet firmly on the ground. So take a moment and get comfortable. And you can either close your eyes or you can look down. Let us begin. This meditation is called Love and Kindness. So eyes closed and looking down, I'd like to ask you to visualize yourself, see your face. And as you look at your face, I invite you to repeat the following to yourself, looking at you. May you be happy. And you can continue to repeat that phrase. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. Next, I invite you to look at the face of someone you love, a loved one. And as you look at their face, repeat the following if you would. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. Next, I invite you to look at the face of a casual acquaintance, Not a relative, no one you love, but someone you run into every now and then, maybe at the health club, the grocery store, a neighbor. See a casual acquaintance. And as you look at that casual acquaintance, would you repeat the following to them? May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. Now I invite you to look at the face of someone that you have conflict with or resentment towards. And as you look at that person's face who you have conflict with, would you repeat the following while looking at them? May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. Two more. Would you visualize the face of either a friend, a neighbor, or a client that's actively using? They may be in relapse, but they're using right now as we speak. And as you look at that person's face, would you repeat the following? May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. And finally, I invite you to look at the face of someone whose health you are concerned about during COVID-19. See the face of someone whose health you're concerned about during COVID-19. And as you look at that person's face, would you repeat the following? May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be at peace. May you be loved. And if your eyes are closed, I invite you to open your eyes. And thank you very much for joining me with our meditation for today. All right, so let's, if I can get these, let's take a moment to sort of talk about when we knew that COVID-19 was real and serious. So for me, it was March 11th. I just did a training in Carbondale, Illinois, and I'm headed back to Chicago, and I turn on the radio and I hear that March Madness was canceled. You know, the NCAA's, the Final Four in basketball. And I said, this has to be serious because they don't cancel March Madness for anything. And that was only 11th. And then the 12th, I turned on the radio and heard that the cost of chicken wings on March 12th dropped dramatically. Why is that? Because the data says that Super Bowl Sunday and the 3 weeks of March Madness, Americans eat more chicken wings during those events than any other time during the year. On March 12th, the NBA postponed its season, and lots of basketball fans went into withdrawal. So those of you who watch ESPN, as you know, we've been watching a lot of like reruns on Michael Jordan and a program on ESPN called The Last Dance about those 6 years when the Bulls were champions. And they've been praising Michael Jordan, and what they've been saying about Michael Jordan is that he is so courageous because he's willing to take the last shot at the end of a basketball game. And let me tell you, my friends, courage is relative. You see, Michael Jordan would be willing to take the last shot at the end of a basketball game, but would he be willing to work in a hospital during COVID-19 like nurses are doing and like doctors are doing and like some of you are doing? To me, that's real courage. 3 weeks ago, my neighbors would at 8 p.m., they would scream every night. And I'm thinking, they must be going stir crazy, being in the house all the time. You know, the philosopher said that you can trace all of our difficulties as human beings to our inability to sit still in a room. Why are they screaming? Are my neighbors losing their minds? Then I realized they weren't screaming, they were cheering. They were cheering for first responders. And it made me think about you. Those of you on this webinar who do substance use disorders treatment, to me, you're first responders. You deal with suicide attempts, overdose survival, or overdose deaths. Some of you have had to tell relatives that their loved one overdosed. You're dealing with homelessness, psychosis, etc. So I recognize you, even if the world doesn't, as a first responder. We're talking about COVID-19. A week later, people started hoarding toilet paper. Now, if you would have told me, if you would have said to me 20 years ago that we would have a pandemic that would affect the whole world, and the first thing people would start to hoard would be toilet paper, I would have said you're out of your mind. We couldn't find hand sanitizer anywhere. It sold out. And whiskey companies in Kentucky and Tennessee started making hand sanitizer. Dermatologists weighed in and said they're seeing more people with rashes on their hands than any time in our nation's history because people are not used to washing their hands that much, especially with alcohol. People started hoarding medication. There's a condition that's called lupus, and there's a medication to treat lupus. And there were some people that heard that lupus medication could prevent COVID-19, so they started hoarding it, and there was not enough medication for some people who actually had lupus. And some of you have gone into grocery stores that look like ghost towns, where people have run out of groceries. And of course, street drug dealers have told us that people started hoarding crack cocaine and alcohol and heroin, etc. We learned that COVID-19 was a worldwide disaster with a widespread infection, a daily death count increases, no vaccine and no treatment. Think about it. If you're right now in early in alcohol and drug recovery, wouldn't that make some people look just anxious enough to want to get high just thinking about this? Businesses and schools started closing, a rise in unemployment. You know, historian William White, so many jobs have gone away during COVID-19. Historian William White said that whenever jobs go away, you can expect to see stimulant epidemics and crises like methamphetamine addiction and crack cocaine addiction and opioid addiction to deal with the trauma of unemployment. Healthcare and first responders were overwhelmed. And then we have that uncertain end date, which ultimately increases trauma. We have that 24-hour news cycle. And in case I forget to say this at the end of our webinar, I encourage everybody on this webinar and also to suggest to your clients not to watch the news 24 hours a day. I give it 2 hours at best because we can get overwhelmed just by watching news all day and all night. Not enough ventilators and masks. Communities of color hit hard. We've learned through research that drug use is increasing during this time. And for those clients that we work with that have histories of trauma, COVID-19, according to Bessel van der Kolk, one of the nation's foremost trauma authorities, can trigger past traumatic stress disorder, et cetera. So let me just talk with you for a moment, and you can put your answer in chat. This will be our first chance to chat. And James, I'll ask you to let me know what people are chatting. What percentage of the clients that you work with who have addictions also have histories of trauma? Would you put your answer in chat? Thank you. What percentage those who are treated for substance use disorders also have histories of trauma? And James, are you seeing anything? I think you can unmute yourself.
The lowest I think I've seen is 75, and a lot more closer to 100 or 100 exactly.
Okay. So that means that if our clients between 75 and 100% of them, thank you, James, have like prior traumatic experiences, then they become vulnerable. There are 5 types of traumatic stress disorders that our clients have. One type is called acute stress disorder. And when one has acute stress disorder, they have the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, except for those symptoms last like 30 days or less. And then we have what's called post-traumatic stress disorder. Your client has been exposed to a traumatic event. They're having recurrent, intensive, distressing recollections of the event, efforts to avoid conversations and situations that bring up memories of the event, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, nightmares, flashbacks, etc. Of course, they call it post-traumatic stress because many of our clients don't experience the symptoms while they're on the battlefield or in prison. They experience those symptoms when they return home, and then they're having these symptoms. Does anyone know the difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma? You can also put that answer in chat as well. The primary difference between post-traumatic stress disorder and complex trauma. What do you see, James?
The first one that came up says complex trauma is trauma over and over, generally developmental.
All right, very good. We'll stay with that answer. So in order to be very good, in order to be diagnosed with PTSD, you have to be exposed to something really specific. As a result of the exposure, you're experiencing nightmares and flashbacks and bad dreams. With complex trauma, exposure to a specific event is not needed. All that's required is to have years where you live with neglect or abandonment or multiple placements or parental substance use disorders, adult emotional unavailability. You know how the folks can be there but not really there for you emotionally, multiple losses, exposure to domestic violence and abuse, and you're vulnerable to complex trauma. If the number one symptom of PTSD includes flashbacks and nightmares and really bad dreams and then you can't sleep, the number one symptom of complex trauma is difficulty regulating emotions. I imagine that some of you have seen children go from calm to explosive. That's what we mean by difficulty regulating emotions. That emotion that fuels complex trauma might be rage. I've been reading a book about boys and their fathers. Heard an incredible story about this boy who played Park District football. And he was a fifth string running back on the football team. If you're a fifth string running back on the football team, you'd have an easier time finding a penny in a Sahara desert than ever getting in a football game. If you're a fifth string running back on a football team, you'd be more likely to be struck by lightning 5 times in the same day and live. Your whole job as a fifth string running back on a football team is to watch grass grow on the football field. The boy's father died, and they held the funeral on a Friday. And he walked in the locker room the following Saturday morning. He said, "Coach, I want to play the whole game." And the coach did what you'd have done, let him play the whole game. His father died. And the boy scored 5 touchdowns. The great Walter Payton from Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, never scored 5 touchdowns in a football game. And coach said, "What got into your fifth string running back?" He said, "Coach, when my dad was alive, he was legally blind. So I figured that since he died and went to heaven, he could see me. I wanted him to be proud of me. I used to work with boys who lived in public housing between ages of 5 to 10 years old, who didn't have contact with their father. Mr. Sanders, can you find my father? Please find him, please. Age 11, have you found my father yet? Please find him, please. Age 12, I think about him all the time. Age 13, I think about him sometimes. Age 14, I never think about him. Age 15, I wish he were dead. You see, my friends, for the last 5 years, I worked with a caseload of young men who suffer from complex trauma, and the underlying cause is rage connected to a father who deserted them, who abandoned them. Just so you know, there's a book that's called Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl, and it speaks to what happens to daughters when their fathers desert them. The research says they're 140 times more likely to have a baby as a teen, 6 times more likely to be sexually abused. You know, predators know when the father's not around. And there's a link between girls being deserted by their father and substance use disorders, addiction, etc. So we're suggesting that you can have some clients whose post-traumatic stress disorder is in remission, and they can be triggered, or they're complex trauma, and they can be triggered by COVID-19. Historical trauma, once a month, since we've all been in quarantine. I participate in a healing circle with Native Americans. And what I've been hearing them say is COVID-19 has been triggering historical trauma for them. As they share with me, we share with each other, they said, because people don't seem all that concerned about what's happening on Native American reservations as it pertains to COVID-19. And then the final traumatic stress disorder, I feel like I gave this my name myself. I call it 24/7, 365 terror. And the way this differs from post-traumatic stress disorder is that with PTSD, you're someplace traumatic and you wind up someplace safer often, and you're having these symptoms. With 24/7, 365 terror, you're in a neighborhood where you never get relief from something traumatic happening, lots of gun violence in the neighborhood, maybe gang violence in the neighborhood, etc. And so what I'm suggesting to you is that when we're doing this virtual therapy with clients, we ought to be checking in with them on whether or not their traumatic stress disorder has been reactivated because of COVID-19. All right, so let's talk about risk factors for traumatic stress disorder triggered by COVID-19. If you had trauma before the trauma, and you all said it, somewhere between 74 to 100% of your clients have a history of trauma before the trauma. Geographic nearness. You know, Larry King was interviewing the daughter of Malcolm X and the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. And Larry King asked each daughter, how do you know your father loves you? Dr. King's daughter spoke first, and I know my daddy loved me. But when he would come home, he would sit all the kids on his lap, and everyone had a special place on their face where they can kiss him, and no one can kiss him there but me. Mine was right here. I know my daddy loved me. And then she said, my daddy had a video, a tape called A Knock at Midnight, where he talked about how he was willing to risk his life so that I, his daughter, Martin Luther King's daughter, could play at Funtown with other children. Then Larry King asked Malcolm X's daughter, how do you know your father loved you? She said, he'd tell me he loved me. Then in the morning, he'd get up and he'd pour himself a cup of coffee. And he'd blow on the coffee to cool it off. Then he'd look at me and smile and said, I would put sugar in this coffee. But would you put the tip of your finger in and you're like brown sugar, you'll sweeten up my coffee. She knew her father loved her. Some of you know this story. Malcolm X's daughter was sitting in the front row of the Aragon Ballroom, about 4 feet away from her father, where her father was teaching. That's not even the COVID-19 6-foot distance. She was sitting in the front row where her father was preaching, and she watched her father get assassinated. The psychologist said that triggered post-traumatic stress disorder, and she started medicating that PTSD with cocaine, heroin, etc. The closer you are to the action, the more likely you are to experience traumatic stress disorders. A lack of support, where you have difficulty expressing feelings. What's interesting, think about this. Alcohol and drugs numb feelings, making it even difficult to express feelings when you're dealing with something like COVID-19. If you're isolated, and everybody's isolated to this day, isolation is like the worst friend of like people in early recovery. Prolonged exposure, and when you feel that whatever the trauma is a threat to your safety or the safety of people that you care about. So strategies to prevent stress from becoming PTSD: talk to you on the phone, Zoom, Twitter, etc. Receive support, encourage your clients to rest, sleep, get plenty of water, nutrition, stress management support, and of course, telephonic counseling can help. Protective factors also include support, a survivor mission. When you can take your pain and turn it into a cause, that protects you. You're living proof of that. For the very majority of people who do addictions work, either in recovery or come from families where there's addiction, and you've taken the pain of what you've gone through, and you've turned it into a cause purpose. Early intervention, community, and of course, helping others protects us. Reduction of news watching. And of course, even for those individuals who don't have substance use disorders, a reduction of alcohol, illicit drugs, and caffeine can be really helpful when we're dealing with catastrophes like COVID-19, et cetera. All right, so here's the flip side of everything I've been saying. The flip side of everything is that because of COVID-19, people are spending more time with relatives than any time in history. For my friends, the research suggests, indirectly, I say it directly, that love is the most important ingredient in all of recovery. So as you know, I tell stories. And so sometimes people stay at the end of my seminars and they tell me stories. So a woman told me the following story, that she and her husband had a baby, and she asked her husband to go home to bring her some clean clothes so that she could wear clean clothes home from the hospital. She said her husband was gone for 2 days. His sister showed up and said when her husband went home, there were men robbing the house. And he went and got the family gun and held him at gunpoint and called the police. She said when the police showed up and saw her husband holding the gun, the police didn't know if her husband was the good guy or the bad guy. So the police accidentally shot and killed her husband. She said she received the largest settlement. She was to receive the largest settlement in Illinois history, wrongful death, police killing her husband. She said, Mark, I was in the courtroom and the judge opened his mouth and the judge said, you will receive. She said, before the judge finished the sentence, there was a woman in the back of the courtroom who stood up and said, wait a minute, Your Honor. He's not our husband. I married him first, we never divorced. The second woman received the settlement. Now, the woman who told me that story told me that she became so bitter after being betrayed by her husband, and she could barely do her work. One day she said she was at home bitter, and there was a ringing at her doorbell. She said there was a 13-year-old girl standing there. And the girl said, the woman who won the settlement is my mother, and the man who you married is my biological father. The girl told her that right before her mother received the settlement check, the state of Illinois came in, did a background check. Found out her mother had been receiving public assistance illegally forever, a felony in all 50 states. They put her mother in prison, the girl said. When she got out of prison, she neglected me. She started using drugs. I haven't been going to school. I've been smoking marijuana. Can I live with you? Can I live with you? And against the recommendation of all her family and friends, she looked at the girl and said, you can live with me. She said, Mark, I mothered this girl. Love brought me back. Love brought me back. And it brought her back too. She's not a college student. Love is the most important word and a ingredient of all recovery. The other thing, paradoxically, is that we all have an opportunity, not just on our clients, to use this time to go on an extended meditation retreat, to eliminate clutter. I bet you some of you are throwing stuff away right now as we speak. Some pets are happier. Everybody's at home. The pets are getting more hugs. As a world, we will come to learn how much work can be done from home. You see, in California, I hear they've seen stars for the first time in years because there are not as many people committing to work. The animals have come out to play. There's so many adults who are working from home in Chicago. Downtown, they are spotting coyotes. I hear in this one country where they have earthquakes, it's so quiet because people are in social isolation that they're able to hear, not earthquakes, volcanoes. Native Americans said that humans have so polluted and done destruction on the earth that COVID-19 is giving Mother Earth the opportunity to sort of replenish itself. Some people are becoming more creative during this time. I'll give you a quick example. As you know, some churches are holding services with cars in the parking lot. One woman told me, and we'll say more about this in a few moments, she so missed her friends that once a week they go to their favorite drive-thru restaurant, 3 cars, they sit next to each other in the parking lot, roll down their windows, and talk to each other while they eat a meal. Some people are painting more, doing more poetry and art during this time. And you, like me, have you noticed that you've been getting a ton of webinar announcements through our email, free education? We can become smarter during this time. In fact, that's my goal for all of us. So why not get smarter while we're in social isolation? In 1665, the University of Cambridge temporarily closed due to the bubonic plague. Sir Isaac Newton had to work from home. He used that time to develop calculus and a theory of gravity. There are some opportunities that COVID-19 presents. So let's talk about reducing isolation and relapse prevention during catastrophes and pandemics. So imagine that most of you remember where you were September 11, 2001. Research says that in all 5 boroughs in New York, the drinking increased. We are establishing that relationship between trauma and heavy drinking. And then there was Hurricane Katrina. And people escaping Hurricane Katrina experienced 5 times the rate of post-traumatic stress disorder compared to people escaping September 11. You might remember the footage of people escaping September 11, they were running. And Bessel van der Kolk and other researchers asked them where they were running towards. People who lived in Brooklyn were running towards Brooklyn. People who lived in the Bronx were running towards the Bronx. People who lived in Staten Island were running towards Staten Island. They were running towards home. And historically, home has been known as a safer place. The difference is this. Those who survived September 11 could go back home. Those escaping Katrina could not go back home. And thus 5 times the rate of PTSD. And you could not keep enough liquor on the shelf to support them, whatever city they relocated to. Let's talk about isolation. In Canada, they did a study called Rat Park. And Dr. Gabor Mate says that he thinks that we're afraid in the United States to repeat this study, where they took these laboratory rats and they put them in cages. They isolated them by themselves. And all they had to drink was a sweet-tasting morphine. That's all they had to eat or drink was a sweet-tasting morphine. And then the researchers introduced trauma and electric shock to their cage. And the rats discovered by trial and error that the way you get rid of this electric shock is to drink the sweet tasting morphine. Then researchers wondered what would happen once they were addicted to the sweet tasting morphine if you removed the trauma. And what they found was that 100% of them overdosed and died. So then they wondered what would happen if you took a group of laboratory rats and instead of isolating them by themselves, you put them in community with other rats. A spacious community, not like Chicago public housing, where they have lots of space to move around, some shade to sleep. And then you put in there maybe a rat swimming pool, a merry-go-round, make it a great America type experience. And then you introduce trauma and electric shock to their cage, and they discovered by trial and error that the way you get rid of the trauma is to drink the sweet tasting morphine. And what they found is that those rats that were in community experienced 5 times less post-traumatic stress disorder than those that were isolated by themselves. And none of them overdosed, and they used 5 times less, or they used 5 times less morphine. They did an experiment with these chimpanzees where they gave them 5 things that they can choose from to eat or drink. Bananas, grapes, water, and a solid form of cocaine and a solid form of heroin. The researchers wondered, given a choice between these 5 things, what do chimpanzees naturally prefer? Number 1, bananas. Number 2, grapes. Number 3, water. And they tended to leave cocaine and heroin alone. Then the researchers wondered, what would happen if you removed their mother from the area? Then you took away their father, and then took away their siblings and all their playmates. What would happen? And once isolated, they started munching on cocaine and heroin. So we need to let our clients know that social isolation does not have to mean emotional isolation, that it's important to let people know what you're feeling on a regular basis. And as we know, people's feelings can fluctuate during this time. So the good news is all the anonymous groups, AA and NA and Smart Recovery and Crystal Meth Anonymous and Methadone Anonymous and the, Marijuana Anonymous, all of these meetings are occurring online. Incredible story about this flight attendant who developed alcoholism, drinking those little bitty bottles of liquor they just serve on airplanes. And they smelled liquor on her breath. And she was forced into drug treatment. And she had to take a short flight from Las Vegas to the international airport in Los Angeles. And when she got off the plane, she had an unbelievable urge to have a drink. She was standing near Terminal 12 and saw all that liquor to her left. And then she looked to her right and saw someone holding a microphone. She ran over to the woman holding the microphone and said, "Will you make an announcement?" And the announcement was, "Will all the friends of Bill W., the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, please report to Terminal 12." And she said within 20 minutes, 20 people showed up from all over the world, said they were friends of Bill W., and they held a 20-person, 12-step group meeting right there at Terminal 12. I've heard some amazing stories. A young adult in recovery says that every week that he and 200 young adults have a Zoom recovery meeting. I've been hearing about NA meetings online. You know, one of my friends has a 200-person sponsee family. And once a year, they go to Wisconsin Dells and they have a reunion. He said, "Mark, with Zoom, my 100-person sponsee family is having a reunion every week. Talk by phone or FaceTime with 3 people in recovery every day." My younger brother told me that when he got into early recovery, his sponsor told him to talk to 3 people in recovery every day. He says, "About what? Doesn't matter. Talk to 3 people in recovery every day." I encourage you to encourage your clients to talk to 3 people in recovery every day. And what I learned from my brother is that you don't at first know what to talk about, but that talking gets deeper and deeper. Movement helps. You know, Bessel van der Kolk wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And what he said in the book is that the brain can forget the details of what happened to you, but the body has a way of remembering for a long time. How many of you on this webinar receive 12 hugs a day? If you receive 12 hugs a day, just put yes in chat. We want to see how many of you receive 12 hugs a day. What do we see there, James? How many people?
At this moment, I see 2 yeses.
All right, out of all these people, okay, how many of you on this webinar receive 8 hugs a day? That's 4 less than 12. Who gets 8 a day? Anybody get 4 a day? Does anyone on this webinar receive 1 hug a day? I do. I hug myself at least once a day. You know, if you look at the United States Constitution as a trauma document, the Bill of Rights, they were coming out of a war, the Revolutionary War. The First Amendment of the Constitution is freedom of speech. Trauma survivors need to talk. The Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is the right to bear arms. People want to feel safe, want to protect themselves. You might find this interesting. The Third Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is no one has a right to touch your body or your property without a good reason to do so. Trauma lodges itself in the human body. So they asked September 11 survivors, what helped you most survive September 11, those in New York? Number 1 answer was acupuncture. Number 2 was massage. 3, yoga. 4, any kind of movement, just shaking your head from side to side. That's what Vanderkoe said, that any kind of movement can help to rewire the traumatized brain. And then dance. You know, some of you might have heard of a dish called chicken and waffles. You know what Langston Hughes said about the origin of chicken and waffles? When I was in Atlanta visiting, Gladys Knight had a restaurant called Chicken and Waffles. Where did it come from? Well, they were African Americans, according to Langston Hughes, who left the South, Mississippi, Alabama, Arkansas, Atlanta. And they moved to Harlem during the Renaissance. And so they would dance until 3 o'clock in the morning. When was the last time you danced until 3 o'clock in the morning? You wake up a sweat. So he said they would leave these dance clubs in Harlem at 3 o'clock in the morning hungry. And it was 3 a.m. They couldn't decide whether or not they wanted breakfast or dinner. According to Langston Hughes, that is the birth of chicken and waffles. All right. So let's talk about relapse prevention during COVID-19. I encourage you to encourage your clients, no matter how you talk to them during this time, by phone, however you talk to them, is to list their 5 primary relapse triggers. Pull out a piece of paper and write down those triggers in their own words, and then say them out loud. Here's why we're suggesting this. When you write them down, you can see them. When you say it down, you can hear it. What I've learned is the more of your 5 senses that are involved in relapse prevention, the less likely you are to sort of fall unconsciously into a relapse. Years ago, I used to talk on a regular basis with an old timer from Alcoholics Anonymous, and this old timer from AA had been in recovery for 30 years. He says, Mark, I do a trigger inventory every day. He says, I'm so aware of my relapse triggers. If I were to pick up and use, it wouldn't be a relapse, it'd be a choice. So we want to go over these triggers with clients on a regular basis and also ask them that during COVID-19, have you noticed any new triggers? And then we want to discuss those on a regular basis as well. By the way, I've noticed that some clients will say, you know, I don't want to talk about triggers. I've moved past that. I once heard someone say that a lack of interest in talking about triggers in itself can be a relapse trigger. Or I love to ask clients this question. Although things are going well now, what would it take for you to return to your previous lifestyle when you were getting high? And how they answer that brings a relapse from the preconscious or the unconscious to their conscious awareness where they can do something about it. So let's talk about marriages and partnerships during COVID-19. Have you noticed, or is it just me? Have you noticed that people seeking recovery are often attracted to each other? A lot of people go to AA and NA and they meet someone in program and they become attracted to each other. My brother started a program called Married Couples in Recovery. He said because, you know, his wife is in recovery too. He says, man, there's no precedent. How do you have a healthy marriage, a healthy relationship? How do you do it without any models? Think about it. Bill W.'s wife was in Al-Anon, not AA. Jimmy K., who founded Narcotics Anonymous, his wife wasn't in Narcotics Anonymous. And so for many people, they're in a house with a partner, a spouse they can't stand, And that is a relapse trigger. And we're also learning that it's also a domestic violence trigger. Because as we speak during COVID-19, domestic violence is dramatically increasing. So my clients ask me, what are the characteristics of addictive relationships? And I tell them, you can always tell when a relationship is addictive because there's lots of drama. These relationships are smothering. You know, the divorce rate in America is 58%. One of the reasons that it's so high is because people take the concept of one half literally. You've probably heard a minister say, you are one half, then upon meeting the other, you become one whole. And then they are one half, then upon meeting you, they become one whole. If you have a pen, work along with me. What is one half plus one half? Anybody? We're the mathematicians. What is one half plus one half? Put your answer in chat. One half plus one half. And what do you see, Scott? What do you see, James?
I think the mathematicians are doing well. They have one, by and large, is the answer.
Okay, but what if I suggest you? Don't get mad at me, anybody. That's the wrong answer. Let me prove it. My grandmother used to say, you can do bad all by yourself. You've probably heard that before. You can do bad all by yourself. I want you to visualize a woman that you've been working with, and she's in recovery. And because of your great work and her great effort, her future is so bright that she needs to wear sunglasses at midnight to keep the rays out. She's here, and she meets the wrong person, and she starts to drop. You've seen that before. One half plus one half equals 2/4, which equals one half. Let me share with you a poem written 400 years ago, and let's think about the translation. Here's the poem. If I am who I am because you are who you are, and you are who you are because I am who I am, then I am not who I am, and you are not who you are. I'll repeat it. If I am who I am because you are who you are, and you are who you are because I am who I am, then I am not who I am, and you are not who you are. What am I saying? If I need you to make me whole, then I'm in trouble. You see, some people before COVID-19 would get 8 hours of space from their spouse, their partner. But now if you have a partner or spouse who's smothering, now you're getting smothered all the time. Here's a healthier version of that same poem. If I am who I am because I am who I am, and you are who you are because you are who you are, then you are who you are, and I am who I am. I am whole and you are whole. And now when we come together, we have a new mathematical formula. 1 + 1 = 3. When two whole people come together, the subtotal of both of them together is greater than either one of them by themselves. Extreme jealousy. There's some people, some clients you have that are so jealous that they're accusing their partner, their spouse, today of having an affair, and they've been quarantined for 2 months. When I was in my 20s, I had a client I worked with. We used to call him Mr. Recovery. He was like a poet for recovery. He would say such clever things about recovery, like, my worst day sober is better than my best day when I was getting high. I'm so grateful for my recovery. I'm grateful I woke up this morning. If you think you woke yourself up this morning, try skipping a day. He was a poet for recovery. And his girlfriend was equally poetic, and they called her Mrs. Recovery. He'd heard, and this was years ago, that she went on a date with someone on a Friday, that she went on a date with someone else. He shot and killed her Saturday. She's buried in the south suburbs of Chicago. He's in prison for life. What he did was he went from a drug as his God to her as her God. When I was a younger man, and I still had my drill sergeant physique, my wife told me, we were in our 20s, that jealousy for her is a sign that she needs to get closer to God. Because if she finds herself being really jealous, it means that she's turning a human being into a God. Obsessiveness, abuse, poor boundaries, unfair arguing. What I mean by that is that fair arguing is when you can argue in the present and about one thing at a time. You've seen those couples. I don't like what you said to me last night. I don't like what you said to me last week. I don't like what you said to me last month. I don't like what you said to me last year. I don't like what you said to me February 4th, 1965. They're like loading up with ammunition. And of course, another sign is that you stay in this relationship in spite of adverse consequences. You may be quarantined together. So let us pause for a moment. I've been talking for about an hour. And what I've learned in my work is not so much what I teach, but more about the action you take. I can't see you. I wish that I could. But I can hear you when you respond. What I'd like to ask you to do is take a moment and just sort of put in chat what's the most important thing that we've talked about thus far, and an action you're going to take based upon what we've talked about. So what's been important that we've talked about, and an action you're going to take as a result of what we've talked about.
Some say everything was important. What we talked about affects us all, clients and provider. Let me continue down. I love the studies on animals with the drug use. Isolation response versus community responses. Social isolation doesn't have to equal emotional isolation. I'm going to focus with my clients on finding ways to increase emotional and social support. Into a cause, which is what I have done. The importance of community and contact during recovery. I will make a greater effort to maintain contact and community with those in recovery. Meditation time in the morning for myself and others. Current living situation can be creating distress in the lives of our participants. What I will do different is providing some of the tips discussed here, specifically the grounding exercise, asking clients about their triggers and trauma responses to COVID, assisting them with effective coping skills, moving their bodies and talking to at least 3 people every day.
Yeah. Right. So what we'll do is, seems like there's a lot of responses. We'll continue because we have just a little bit more time. Okay. So then my clients want to know, what's a healthy relationship? Both are whole. And I suggest to them that in order to develop wholeness, you have to have a relationship with yourself. And I also suggest to you that some people are so busy, they use that as the reason why they don't have a relationship with themselves. You can't have another relationship with another unless you're also comfortable in your relationship with yourself. A relationship with friends. And then for many of our clients, most of the clients that we work with, the research says 90% of people with drug problems have a relationship with God or believe in God. If you have a relationship with yourself and you have healthy friendship, now you're more ready for a relationship with another. Each is growing and encouraging the other to grow. Each has a separate life outside of the relationship. They can spend time alone. If you have the ability to spend time alone, and your clients do, that means they're not crowding someone right now at home. Healthy boundaries, no abuse, and what we talked about before, fair arguing. One thing at a time and in the present. All right, so let's talk about maintaining friendship during COVID-19. Incredible story about this American soldier that was stationed in Afghanistan. And she flew back to New Jersey to get married. Then after she got married, she flew back to Afghanistan and lost her hand in battle. Her coworkers, who were her friends, went back on the battlefield and found her wedding band, found the hand, so they could give her back that wedding band that was lodged on that finger. Where would the world be without friends? My friend Benny Lee says, lots of clients, when they're using, they don't have friendships, they have fiendships. It's like, you're not really my friend, you're an associate. And we know that friendship is really important to recovery. You know, one of the reasons that women have higher recovery rates than men is because women are more likely to have more non-using friends that they socialize with. But let's talk for a moment about men and friends. I read an article in Men's Health that says when men don't have contact with male friends, it can do as much damage to our bodies as smoking a pack of cigarettes per day and drinking a pint of liquor per day. Men need contact with our friends. We do. I'm so sure of this that once a month, me and my baseball buddies, once a month, we just did it like Sunday. We do a Zoom baseball chat. I'm gonna try to get my basketball buddies together so we can do a Zoom basketball chat. I don't know about you, but COVID-19 has helped me eliminate that excuse why I can't contact my friends from high school, in college, and middle school. When men don't have contact with male friends, it can do as much damage to our health as smoking a pack of cigarettes per day and drinking a pint of liquor per day. I was watching a Dr. Phil show a few years ago, and he had an expert on that talked about women and stress, who said that when women experience stress, there are two things that really help them. Tending behavior, that is spending time caring for those who they love, and befriending behavior and spending time with their female friends. Think about this. Years ago, I heard a woman give her lead, her recovery lead, and she says, you know, it's really isolating for a woman with addiction the more it progresses. She says, if you're a man and you're an alcoholic and you wind up losing your job, they'll call you a wino. And you can, quote, end of quote, we don't use that language anymore, and you'll be surrounded by, quote, other winos. She said there's no such thing as a winette. As women's addiction progresses, they become more isolated. So part of our job is to help her to think about reconnecting with her friends. So I read a book, I'm not smart enough to come up with this myself, that every woman needs 7 types of friends. One that she's so comfortable with that she doesn't care how she looks when she's around her. She can swear, curse around her. She doesn't need to be so professional around this woman. They say that every woman needs an older, wiser woman in her life. A do you remember when friend? You know, someone you can reminisce with about the past. A confidant. A confidant. This friend knows where the body is buried, according to Dr. Brene Brown, and she's not telling anybody. Every woman needs a confidant as a friend. A good listener, a friend you can count on in a crisis, and a friend in the same situation. So if you're a single parent, you need to love one friend as a single parent. If you're in recovery, you're a woman, you need a friend that's also in recovery, a woman. A friend recently divorced, if you're recently divorced, etc. Let's encourage friendship for our clients while they're on social isolation. All right, so this is also an opportunity to meditate and practice stillness. So let's talk for a moment about those activities that are good for immune health. My friends my age have been taught, let's take our vitamins, vitamin D, let's take our vitamins. But you know what's good for immune health? Is to encourage your clients, when you talk to them by phone, to think of 3 reasons to be grateful every day. And laughter, the research says, is good on immune health. In fact, one study said that when you laugh, it releases endorphins in the brain, and dopamine in the brain, these same neurochemicals that are released when you use drugs like heroin and cocaine. Saying thank you on a regular basis. And then there's forgiveness. So you all mentioned that most of your clients have histories of trauma. Incredible story about this priest named Father Eddie O'Brien. Father O'Brien was up at 3 o'clock on a Saturday night. He was writing his Sunday morning sermon. There was a knock on the door. Father, there's a man in the hospital who's sick. He's dying. He says he wants to see a priest before he dies. So Father O'Brien made it to the hospital, and the nurse said, he's alcoholic. He's drunk now. He cursed out the whole medical team. Good luck. Father O'Brien walked in the man's room and said, what do you want? He said, you want to see a priest? Sit down, start telling your story. The man lost 3 wives because of his drinking. He lost 5 jobs because of his drinking. Father O'Brien asked him, is there something you'd like to tell a priest before you die? He said, yeah, I'd love to tell you. I know when I die, I'm going to go to hell and God will never forgive me. Finally, he had to say. He said one day when he was 18 years old, he had a job working on a railroad. This was a simple job. And all he had to do was, whenever a train would come through, was to push a button so a gate could close, so no cars could come through while the train was coming through. He said one day when he was 18 years old, he was so drunk, he forgot to push the button. And the train came through and the car came through at the same time, and the train hit the car, killing a husband and wife and their 2 young daughters. Father O'Brien said, I've forgiven you, so I know God will. That was my father, my mother, and my 2 older sisters. Unforgiveness, especially for years on end, could really be a stressor on our mind and our body. Then meditation. You know, meditation by definition is to train the brain to be in the present and to think about one thing at a time. I'll let you know an insight. If I think about being quarantined until, say, November, I'm stressed out. But if I can pull myself back to today, I'm okay. I'm talking to you right now, and that's okay. Okay, get comfortable again in your seat. Have a quick exercise for you. We'll take 1 minute to do this. All right, I want you to close your eyes and look down. And as you close your eyes and look down, I'd like to ask you to visualize the face of everyone you love and everyone who loves you. And as you visualize the face of the individuals you love and who love you, I want you to visualize yourself and them giving each other a hug. So see the faces of those that you love and give each other a hug as you look at each of them. You know, with clients, I try not to meditate too long. You know, part of wisdom, especially in the beginning, the wisdom of Alcoholics Anonymous, they don't even ask you to meditate until like step 11, because they know that if you haven't done a certain amount of work, you may not like what you see when you go inside. All right. Someone told me that there are 2 emotions, love and fear, and that love is stronger than fear. So one way we can use this exercise with our clients, is whenever you're afraid, just go and look at the picture that you love, people you love, and people who love you. Or better yet, if you can't do that, then close your eyes and visualize that you're hugging them and that they're hugging you. And when you look at the people that you love, it's harder to be as stressed as you were, less as frightened as you were before you did that exercise. All right, so COVID-19 is a pre-traumatic experience, a lack of predictability. My friends, I lived as a kid with domestic violence. I lived with alcoholism and frequent relocation. So the gift I gave myself was I've been in the same neighborhood for 40 years, married to the same wife for 34 years, same phone number for 35 years. My friends, don't tell anybody. I even still have AOL in my email address. Having lived with so much unpredictability, I've created predictability for myself. And then all of a sudden, COVID-19 struck. And my life, like so many other people, is unpredictable. So we encourage our clients during this time to create a schedule and get moving. You know, when we feel stress or trauma, we go through what's called the fight-flight response. Discourage fight, because as I mentioned earlier, domestic violence increasing, but encourage flight. Tell your clients to get up and just keep moving. They feel numb, keep moving. Lost a sense of time. I don't know about you, but early on, I was in for so many days. One day, I was telling people that I was talking to by phone and internet, enjoy your weekend, enjoy your weekend. Isn't that something that you usually say on a Friday? It was Wednesday, and I was telling people to enjoy. I lost track of the day that it was. Feeling unsafe, hugs help. Talking to people you care about help. Having a private space at home can help. All right, the use of technology and to deal with the trauma of family recovery. Some of you should be shifting from individual counselors and therapists to family therapists. When you work with clients via technology, it's a check-in to see how the whole family is doing. Because oftentimes these are worse times when people are not used to being together all the time. So shift from an individual worker to a family worker and your clinical orientation. You all know HALT. If you want to stay sober, don't get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. I learned something just 2 years ago. I used to think that hunger only referred to like physical hunger for food. But, you know, think about it. You can get too hungry for like a certain relationship that you feel like you have to have, a job that you have to have. You have to have that car to be happy. You can get hungry for things. So if you want to stay sober, don't get too hungry, too angry, too lonely, too tired. Here's an exercise. The next time you talk to clients over the phone, ask them, are they more likely to think about returning to drugs if they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired? What's number one? And then what's number two? And which of these is number three, number four? Another way to do some trigger work with your clients. All right. We talked about mindfulness, breath work, helping others, love is stronger than fear, etc. Let's see here. Okay. So let's talk about telehealth, factors to consider when using telehealth and its benefits. Does the client have the capacity and willingness to participate? We need to examine the options, review the agency's policies and procedures, identify how services will be documented, billed, and supervised, pay attention to privacy issues, and get training on telehealth. The one thing I'm aware of is that not every client has a computer, and not only every client has a cell phone. I got a very interesting email today from SAMHSA that introduced us to a program that's helping clients get more minutes on their cell phone. And hopefully that can contribute to their ability to have online or virtual counseling and therapy. These are the different models that we're able to use. Here's what I encourage you to do. When COVID-19 is like behind us a bit, let's advocate for us to have more ways of communicating with clients, because more people have been able to reach some of their clients. So James, I'm gonna pause for a moment and find out who has questions. So I'll respond to their questions, and then we'll have the big close at the end. So who has a question? And you can put your questions in chat. In fact, you can ask a really difficult question, because if I can't answer it, there's a lot of people on this call that can.
Okay, Mark, this is Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
So we have one question from Alicia. She wants to know, can you develop PTSD as a result of complex trauma?
Oh, what's interesting about that, good question. Get this, watch this, of course. Yes, 12% of people who have complex trauma also have PTSD. So they're having difficulty regulating emotions. They might be misdiagnosed with conduct disorder because of the behavior, but 12% of them are also hearing voices and having flashbacks and nightmares and bad dreams. I'm going to suggest to you that we are in a situation right here where all of us probably online can become trauma specialists because so many people are offering us to do trauma workshops online. Yes, the answer is yes.
What is the alternative now that we are not supposed to hug?
Oh, I haven't looked at it closely, but I just gave you an exercise where you can visualize yourself hugging virtually. You know how I know that can work for some people? You know how I know it can work? You know how I really know? Because a handful of you know that 25 years ago, I was giving a speech in the U.S. Virgin Islands. I'm on the other side of the water, and I get the news that my first child had just died. So I'm sitting in an airport in Puerto Rico waiting to come back to the States. So I visualized myself hugging everybody who I loved and everybody who loved me, and that wasn't enough. So I closed my eyes and I visualized God hugging me, and that was everything for me. The people who do touch somatic therapy are actually teaching clients to hug themselves. And then those warm, those heavy blankets. Sometimes those heavy blankets feel like a hug. You might be living with people who are quarantined like you, and you all are having no contact with the outside. Wouldn't it be interesting if you are from a family that doesn't hug and touch, that somebody introduced that to the family, those that you're quarantined with, even though you can't hug those on the outside?
They were asking about whether you could speak to the importance of routine, how to write it, apply it, adjust it, especially during these changing times. As it relates to the change to online meetings and some of those aspects. Yeah,
so check this out. My son is 17 years old. He'll be going to college next year. But right now, he's under the roof with me and his mother. And 2 weeks ago, I looked up. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. First off, I should have been asleep at 1 o'clock, but I saw the white of his eyes. Then I found myself repeating something to him that my grandfather from Little Rock, Arkansas used to say to me. Early to bed, early to rise. Makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. See, we don't want to stay up so late, and our clients don't want to stay up so late that we lose our routine. What was it that Martin Luther King said? That some strange things happen at midnight. So we want to encourage our clients and ourselves to have a certain time when we go to bed and a certain time that we give up. For me, get up. The best thing about COVID-19 for me is I'm doing now what's called savoring. How cool is this? I like to go to small towns. I like to drive from Chicago to Atlanta because I pass a lot of mountains, lots of trees. Chicago, we have no mountains. We have some trees. But when you see things in small towns like redbirds and bluebirds and different animals that you don't see in Chicago, taking a moment just to take that in, that lake, just taking it in, right? Well, what I've been doing is waking up naturally. And let's say my work hour begins at 9. If I work up at 8 a.m., I try to spend an hour doing nothing, just taking it all in. In fact, these 2 months, I don't know about you, my window faces east. I've seen the sun rise the last 2 months more than I have in the last 40 years. And so you work with the client on that schedule. So maybe they have a wake time and a sleep time and a breakfast time and a meditation time and a prayer time, a lunch and dinner time. How about this? A 12-step time. How about this one? A time when you do is absolutely nothing. There's a ritual that happens in every bar in America. Exactly 5 minutes to 2 a.m., the bartender yells out, "Last call for alcohol." And the bar gets so quiet and people are wondering, how are we going to socialize without drinking? We now have the opportunity to practice getting still, and so do our clients. So I would just work with them in helping to create a schedule that works with them and making sure that they also have some breathing room to simply do nothing. By the way, I did some research on what astronauts do when they're out in outer space and when they're isolated. And they keep a schedule in space. But one astronaut said, Scott Kelly said, but not so tight that you can't have fun. So he said on a regular basis that he and the crew would watch a program together on TV with snacks. And he found himself binging on Game of Thrones twice. My friends, COVID-19 is giving me the Game of Thrones. I'm on season 7. Had this not occurred, I would not have had a chance to watch that great TV. So for you, we encourage you to laugh and do something every day to center yourself. And it's helping professionals pay attention to your own trauma and whether or not you're being activated through secondary trauma. And we encourage you to connect with your friends via Zoom, family reunions, graduations, lunch with coworkers on the computer, and lunch within your department, etc. You know, I tell stories, so people stay at the end of my seminars and they tell me stories. And my mentor tells me stories. So I'll share with you a story from my mentor. His mentor was dying and called my mentor and asked, would you fly from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and sit near my bedside and help me write one more article before I die? So my mentor got on the plane and flew from Florida to Kalamazoo, Michigan. And he's sitting near his mentor's bedside and said, man, I love you, but this is really strange. He said, you've written 500 articles on addictions recovery. You've revolutionized addictions treatment through your pen. Why are you writing this article on your deathbed? His mentor quoted that philosopher who said that each of us dies twice. He said, the first time you die, it's a physical death. They'll have a funeral for you. And the next time you die is the last time someone on earth speaks your name. And if you keep helping people with their recovery, there'll be people speaking your name for a long time. I imagine that many of you saw the movie The Color Purple. Oh, they could have used some trauma specialists and some addictions counselors and some recovery coaches in The Color Purple. There was lots of domestic violence. You told Harpo to beat me. A lot of drinking, childhood sexual abuse. In the middle of the movie The Color Purple, a singer showed up from Memphis named Suge Avery, and she was the daughter of a Memphis preacher. And towards the end of the movie, Suge Avery was going back to Memphis to sing. They didn't know that she was planning to bring half of the family with her back to Memphis. So in true Southern tradition, when they hit the road, they held a dinner for her. And as they were leaving after the dinner, her husband tipped his hat, and he said to those remaining in the dining room, you're the salt of the earth. So I looked up that phrase, the salt of the earth. Found out the phrase, the salt of the earth, has been with us for a long time. It's in the Bible. I learned that in ancient Rome, people were not paid in dollars and cents. They were paid in salt. You've probably heard that phrase, he's not worth his weight in salt. I learned in America, before we had refrigeration, salt was used to preserve food. So salt was considered precious and sacred, which is exactly how I see you. Individuals who've dedicated your life to helping others, you truly are the salt of the earth. Let's stay in touch with each other for the next 100 years. I told you I have AOL in my email address. I have abandonment issues. So that's my email address, my website address. And stay tuned because Southeast ATTC has some other announcement for you. But in terms of my part, you can stay on the webinar. Thank you so very much. So here's Jane.